Working Cows Podcast, episode 377. This episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. And this episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag. We've been fortunate to feature a number of Understanding Ag's regenerative farming and ranching experts on the podcast over the years. In that time, Understanding Ag's reputation for helping producers understand and successfully and profitably apply money-saving regenerative principles and practices has only grown. And there are two primary reasons for that. First, Understanding Ag's consultants are farmers and ranchers who've been there, done that on their own regenerative farms. And second, Understanding Ag's consultants aren't in the business to sell you costly inputs. They get no commissions and you get no pressure. Just profit-building solutions for your operation. Learn more at understandingag.com and discover the hope in healthy soil. That's www.understandingag.com. If you missed it this week, we did have a bonus episode released last Friday. It was a recording of my appearance on Jared Sorensen's Profitable Regeneration Masterclass, and I'm looking forward to being a part of his Regenerative Legacy Summit coming up on August 13th and 14th. I will be on August 13th and Tuesday, August 13th. And you're welcome to go to the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/377, and find a link there to sign up for the the Regenerative Legacy Summit. And there's a lot of speakers on there. Melinda Sims, Joel Salatin, Cal Hardage, a lot of previous guests of the Working Cows podcast will be there sharing about ranching for the next generation, and I will be sharing on the topic of profitable stewardship. So go ahead and check that out and register at the link at workingcows.net/377. Very excited to be joined today by Lane, Hale, and Justin Rader from 100th Meridian Ranching. And more to the point of our conversation today, they are also residents of Canadian Texas, Hemp Hill County, recently experienced the largest wildfire in Texas history, over 1 million acres burned in one single fire. And we're going to talk to them today just kind of about the process of preparing for, getting through, and recovering from this wildfire event. So very much appreciate their willingness to come and talk about these things. We've experienced similar tragedies in our neighborhood, and just finding people willing to share their story is hard in its own right. So I really appreciate them being willing to come and share with us about this fire and their experience with it. So Justin, Lane, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Yes, sir. You bet. Thanks for having us. This is exciting.
Yeah. Well, and you were definitely in our prayers, a few months back during the fire that went through your part of the world. And that's kind of what we'd like to talk about today a little bit anyway, is kind of the Smokehouse Creek Fire and some of the process, what you experienced, and then some of the recovery process. So yeah, maybe just kind of set the context as far as the fire itself and what actually happened.
Yeah, sounds good. And just to do a quick pause, like we just want to say thank you for doing the work you're doing on the podcast and being so consistent to find awesome people that we can all learn from. You make it really handy for us to learn stuff continually while we're out scratching our head or holding up a post or underneath the pickup working on it or something. So thanks for that. It's just made our whole lives better by listening to the podcast.
Appreciate that. I've benefited greatly from other podcasts, so it's fun to kick something else that other people benefit from as well. So
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So, when you're here in the middle of a fire like that, you have one perspective, and then so I don't know what the rest of the world's perspective on it, or if you hear about it at all or not, but it's kind of one of those events that it's hopefully one or two times in a lifetime that we went through with this Smokehouse Creek Fire late February of this year. Um, so just kind of what happened with it. Um, but obviously wildfire, um, over 1.2 million acres burned. The largest wildfire in Texas history, fifth largest in the U.S. Unfortunately, there's two people who passed away in it, which is tough. The fire was started by a power pole that blew over in some pretty high wind. You can see a photo of that power pole laying on the ground, and the fire started from there. So that was about 90 miles west of us. And the whole fire happened over 2 or 3 days, roughly. In the early parts of that, it was blowing from west to east. And so the fire was just what it was. It was a relatively long, skinny fire with a relatively small head fire, like, I'd guess 20 to 30 miles wide, depending on where you looked at it. And then the wind shifted on day 2 or 3 once it got in our neck of the woods, blowing it south. And so what was like a 20 or 30 mile wide head fire, now became like 80 or 90 miles wide, blowing south, which is just impossible for anybody to fight. And those kind of days were seeing, low humidity, high wind, not any of the same conditions you have in like a prescribed fire. So it was truly wild. More or less burnt that million acres in 2 or 3 days. But things were a blur for sure. It was a weird feeling to be out there a day or 5 days after the fire, and people call and they say, "Is it out?" And like, we just don't know. We're kind of out of touch with reality, and you can look around, everything you see is burnt. And you don't know if it's still going or what 3% contained means or 90% contained means, but it was a surreal experience for sure. So yeah, probably 40,000 cattle displaced in the thing. We've heard numbers from these couple counties here that close to us, like maybe 7,000 to 8,000 dead animals in each county. In our little town of Canadian was just part of the fire. There's lots of other towns affected, but about 60 homes burnt in our little town from what we've heard. Most of those were kind of on the edge of town. So, kind of backed up to a small pasture or something. So that extra fuel and the way of grass probably played a role in some of those catching on fire, but not all of them. And just ourselves, ranch wise, we lost about 5,000 acres of grass and a handful of bulls that were out on lease with some customers. And the place that burnt was actually some custom grazing cows we had, and a handful of those we lost as well. But 98% of them miraculously we were okay. So, just fortunate that it was that good. You didn't have to go very far to find 100% dead cows on some ranches. So that was really tough.
It's kind of across the fence on that place.
Yes.
It's pretty amazing.
Yes. Kind of literally across the fence. It was a lot worse. So, blessed for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've gone through, similarly destructive events in my neighborhood, and it seems like they're always that same story of just across the fence, somebody lost 80% of the herd. This guy here loses one calf, and you just never can tell how those things are going to hit and what they're going to do. So yeah, just kind of wild stories. Justin, do you have, or maybe both you and Lane, do you have some prescribed fire experience from previous work that you've done? Is that something that you guys have messed around with before, or is that not something that happens in your neighborhood much?
So I was a range major at OSU. So prescribed fire for cedar control was kind of like one of our big,
Yeah.
points. Um, and so we took some prescribed fire classes, and we would burn stuff growing up, mostly our improved grasses, our non-native stuff. Um, and so we would always do a night burn on a small chunk, and it was kind of common. Um, and the culture's changed some lately. There's been wildfires and some prescribed fires that got out of hand. And so people are kind of a little more nervous about it, um, which is a kind of a people problem a little bit. But you can understand the risk too. Like you don't want to burn somebody off, but um, I'm a little bit worried that the culture is going to say all fire is bad instead of a prescribed fire that's a totally different beast than this single digit humidity kind of fire.
Right. Yeah. They're just about to open up CRP in our neighborhood, and the forecast this week for the first day of CRP being open is like single digit humidity and 100 degrees. I'm like, just fill the fire rig, I guess. That's a recipe for very scary stuff.
Yes. Sure. Anything's possible for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that was one thing we learned from the fire. Like you kind of live and die by the humidity and the wind.
Yeah.
I think that's true pretty much universally with fire.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What was kind of the experience for you there on the ground? I mean, you sent me some videos, pretty tough to watch of, just leading cattle away from flames, and, can't tell much from the video necessarily, but they're not very far from it, so kind of talk me through some of how you guys approach the day to day while the fire was active and going through your area. How you guys kind of tried to approach getting cattle to safety and some of those things?
Yeah. Like the day up, so the fire's going. It was burning for a day or two before it got us. When it's within the county, it looks a little more serious, especially when the wind's blowing like right over our main headquarters all day. So it looked like, okay, really good angle to get really close. And so around home, where we're cell grazing, we were able to call a few groups of, I think we had a group of cows and a group of bulls at the time. So we were able to call several hundred head into kind of dirt water lots at the time. And that went pretty fast and pretty easy. I was really surprised. From there, we were just kind of sitting and watching the wind. So we watered down our house and the backyard fence and stuff, stuff that could have caught the house on fire. But it wasn't enough. Your house can only pump so much water. And so the only trick there is just starting early. And so, it felt like we were okay risk wise. It may have burned, may not have, the house, but we were wrong. So we thought the smoke was, lined out for our headquarters area where we got the cows ready, and that was fine. But we had a place south that had some custom cows on it, and it did not look at the time like that was going to be hit. But it sure enough, as the wind was changing, the angle changed and the time changed just enough where that got hit, and we were basically totally unprepared. So as soon as that kind of blew over, we got down there as quick as we could to assess. We probably went a little too soon. If there's still stuff actively, pretty hot burning, we should probably not be in there. But it had mostly blown over and kind of internal fires. So you could tell the whole thing burnt. We need to do something tomorrow. And that's how we went to bed. We kind of knew, hey, this happened. We need to be ready tomorrow. And so, towns also burning. You hear, you get phone call here or there. This house burned. My folks' house had a house in town and it burnt, and just all this other side stuff is going on as well. But we kind of knew what the next day had in store. We didn't know if the cows were okay or not. So we just get out there and just scout around the next day, kind of a triage deal.
What was your preparedness? I mean, did you have previous experience that helped you prepare for this, or things that strategies that you had in place? You mentioned dirt water lots. Is that something that you kind of try to keep accessible just in case of something like this happening, or how? What's your what was your plan
Yeah.
prior to the fire?
Yeah. We do have a few dirt water lots, kind of where there's a, maybe a half-acre spot with some fence around it. There, you could call stuff, and it usually stays, kind of weedy, but not big, tall, grassy fuel kind of a place. And so that was really handy to call things to. Just by paying attention to how Fausto had grazed some of his stuff in the past, we had intentionally hammered a couple improved grass places over the winter, thinking, okay, if that is if we're having a bad fire, that's at least 100 acres or something we can go into where it's pretty low fuel, where the cows have a really good chance of not getting burnt too much. We didn't make it to that place, but we were within a half mile of it. So I think having some of those scattered around in your grazing plan is not a bad idea. At least a spot or two to go, where there's a chance, where you give them better odds for sure. The cows that did burn, I mean, there's places where it's 6-inch buffalo grass, but there's a lot of places where it's chest high, big blue stem. And it is miraculous, how they made it. So I don't know how a cow acts in the fire. I've never sat around that long to see, but they must have some kind of intuition. A lot of them. And then they can definitely get in a bind and get in a corner and get scorched real bad. But just for context, we had the March 6, 2017 fire, which we call the Perryton fire. So several years ago. And at the time, that was our context for fire. That was a big, bad fire. It's like 300,000 acres, ripping really fast, like 60 or 70 miles an hour. I nearly got me and my wife in a bind, moving cows there. So that made us think, several casualties, people died in that, a family member of ours, and just some other really sad people stories that passed away. So that makes you think, and like, do I need to be in there? Number one. And then where do we go? Which direction do we go? How much do we know about the wind? How likely is it to change? Do we have a plan B and C to get out of there if we need to? Those kind of things that like obviously come to the forefront in our mind, from that fire. So you see a lot of devastation from that 17 fire, and then you kind of do the best you can in an emergency here. But I think every fire, everybody gets a little better at managing through it, probably.
Sure. Lane, was this your first experience with a wildfire?
Yes and no. I actually grew up down in Southwest Texas, a town called Ozona. And I remember when I was all middle high school aged, it was probably, I can't remember the exact year it was, but there were some wildfires. That country is so rocky and rough that your only chance was to fight it when it got to a road or a county road or a pavement or something like that. But that country is also really big. There's not as many houses and infrastructure to be burned up. And it doesn't spread quite as fast just because there's not as much forage. So to see something this big move so fast was, I want to say scary, but you almost don't have enough time to realize what's going on. I remember sitting we were at Justin's house. We'd all kind of congregated there and had everything pulled in, and we said, well, we did the best we could. And that fire, when it was still moving east to west or west to east, we could see the flames. Were they like mile and a half south of the house? And we're like, hey, this is fixing to get real, boys. Like, we got to go. And the wind changed, like almost like you snapped your fingers and the wind changed. And it's kind of a feeling of relief for an instant. And then you think, man, we didn't even think about that place on the river because it wasn't in danger. We didn't think it was in danger. That's a pretty sickening feeling to go from thank you God to what oh man,
Mhm.
it's such a whirlwind of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What kind of help did you see come, or how did that whole network get played out, and yeah, just what did you see as far as the assistance coming? What did that look like?
Yeah. And that's our hope is like that. Yeah, the fire was what it was, and it was devastating. But we really just want to highlight the people that helped us so much because they were game changers, life changers. Same as that, the previous fire, it changes your life each time, in ways you can't even really like express. So, um, Lane, you know, everybody's phone is blowing up, and Lane gets lots of calls. I got lots of phone calls. Um, some of them from people, neighbors, some of them from strangers. And it's hard to keep up that kind of outpouring of help is coming. It's hard to like answer the phone fast enough and be able to understand like where you need the help.
Mhm.
Um, so we do it like that's the take home. It's like the people who showed up and broke their back were the heroes. So
What do you think is the best kind of help in that moment?
That's a tough question, Clay. Um, one day you'd see a group of people helping here, and the next day, the ones working are now receiving the help. This went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and we had people come from all over the place, donated physical labor, material donations, hauling hay, lunches, sending money, like your church did, Clay, and just words of encouragement came from everywhere. I almost feel like it's almost a little bit of a loaded question, I mean, how do you pick one thing because it was all so helpful, if you will. I'll tell you, I think somebody probably the most helpful thing were those that understood trauma and how people react,
Hmm.
and were able to differentiate between certain situations and prioritize, if you will. Because it's almost like that day, whether it be the fire or the outpouring of help, it's almost like drinking out of a fire hose, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
You get so overwhelmed, it impairs your decision making process, and that was tricky to navigate through for a lot of people. Wouldn't you agree, Justin?
100%. Like probably as ag people, we're not really tuned into like reading people's trauma. But say like my wife, who's a nurse practitioner in the ER, she can pick up on that where it would take me instantly. It'd take me an hour to read that on somebody. Um, so I don't think it's a stretch at all to call it a trauma. Like, if you lose your grass, watch your ranch burn, or you're burning down your home, or lose some portion of your cattle herd or all of it. Even one of those is a pretty big stressor. And then when they all happen on the same day for a lot of people, and then you get 30 people asking, what can I do? It kind of overloads people to a degree. And that's normal. That's okay for people to be overloaded. And, but even on a good day when none of that stuff happens, it's hard for these, us rough and tumble independent ag people to take help. We're supposed to be the ones giving help, we think, instead of taking it. So you put all that together and it's a big emotional, deal. So the default answer that everybody goes to is, send the help to my neighbor. They need it worse than I do. But
Mm.
even though that's true in a lot of cases, when there is such an outpouring of help, like we can't all send it down the road, and taking it and using that help, whether it's trucking or materials or lunch or just somebody showing up to help you do stuff is really the best scenario.
I think understanding that it's normal to be in shock or traumatized is like Justin was talking about, like kind of a rough and tumble ag people. Like we don't feel anything. Well, I disagree.
Mhm.
After seeing it firsthand, I mean, it's
Mhm.
okay to not be okay. I mean, just the decisions that take place that are hard to make. Where do you send your cattle? How many do we send? Can they all make it? Do we need to sort off the worst ones and call them Do we sell them at a packer or the sale barn? Wait, we need to document it all for uh, some type of USDA program that might come up. Well, how do we do that? Need to get a hold of FSA. Um, well, I got a flat tire again. It just all runs together, and after a while, you just, man, you don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. We talked about, kind of mentioned vaguely the Atlas blizzard that hit here in 2013, and I kind of wanted to try and do a 10-year look back on it, and I couldn't find guys that were willing to talk about it. I found 3 guys that were willing to talk, but most of them are like, nope, still too soon. So it's hard on people losing livestock, I don't know of any human deaths in that deal. But just infrastructure, livestock, all that, makes it incredibly difficult, even this much time later. So I appreciate you guys being willing to share, what do you think, you would do, or what's changed? What will be what might be different next time?
No, it is totally understandable. Like, that's something that devastating is the Atlas, where you don't really feel like digging that up and recreating that wound and going through those things again. I think like so one thing that's helped prep us is like there's been small fires throughout our lives, and you learn how to manage, the chain of events that need to be done through small fires, and you get a little better on the next one and the next one. But one thing that we feel like we learned this time, probably in the 17 fire, we felt like more, and a victim isn't the right word, but I'm going to use the word victim because it's just understandable. I don't know anybody that truly feels like a victim. Sure, the fire affected people. But I don't think that mentality of a victim is prevalent. But I'm going to use the word, even though it's the wrong word. So we, in the 17, we've kind of felt more on the victim side. We weren't able to go help people far, soon after the fire, or very far out after the fire. On this fire, it was different. We had so many people show up and help us, that it sped up our recovery a little bit. So we were kind of able to go on day 2 and 3 and help some people. So it gives us the perspective as a victim, but also the perspective as a helper a little more. And we were fortunate that one of the first times out to go help somebody, another helper was already there, a guy from Missouri. He was wise enough to teach us a little bit about how traumatized people function. He was there helping some family, and the things he pointed out kind of were like, number one, how to realize where people are at and kind of assess what they're capable of. And then number 2, how to kind of like respectfully fill in where they're incapable. And so we were really fortunate to learn that lesson a little bit from him to begin with. And then we got to see that play out, and, the use for that as we got around and saw more people. So as the helper, if we all got to realize that the victim's kind of doing the best they can do under the situation, and their decision making is probably impaired a little bit, and they're under loads of stress, and that's okay. That's just humans, and that's just meeting people where they're at. Some of them can make pretty quick, progressive decisions, and some are a lot slower, which is okay too. But and you probably got to work by somebody for 2 or 4 or 6 hours to kind of understand where they're at. Say, is this making sense? Is this adding up? Is like, sometimes our tendency is to go piddle with the broken gate stick over in the corner when there's cows that are out of water, right now. And so kind of just working alongside of people to assess that helps understand where they're at. And then you can start to kind of make some of your own assumptions of like, man, it'd be nice if this could get done. I don't know. Lane saw a lot of that. He scattered around and helped a lot of people And just by him and Dusty, scattering around helping people, and kind of like we'd visit about it in the evenings. Hey, it seemed like maybe this needs to be done over here at this ranch. Um, or this didn't get done, or this is knocked out of the park. This they're on the great track. Um, Seeing those kind of progress happening or not happen, it kind of lets you know to where to fill in a little better.
Yeah, I was probably in a unique position, kind of being the new guy and not having a ton of history with a lot of the folks around. Whereas, you and Dusty, born and raised here, really had a deep connection with a lot of people, which is really good in times of high stress and tragedy, but also can act like blinders at times too, I think. And I was able to maybe have just a little bit of a fresh perspective on what I at least thought was going on. And I thought that was good. I thought something that we learned and something that probably also helps us be prepared, because it's inevitable. I mean, it's going to happen again. Only thing we can do is get better at our job, right? And I think being able to look at the big picture and prioritize, and really it comes down to delegation. Really, I personally think it's okay to take help, and it's okay to let people tackle specific tasks. I think as someone in a managerial type position in a high stress environment, you can't get bogged down in the little things. Gather the cattle and let the truckers help relocate them. If it's half a truckload or more, put it on a truck. You're spinning your tires using little trailers to haul big loads. There's going to be remnant cattle showing up for a while, and that's okay. One thing we learned as far as preparedness as well is make sure you've got a tire patch kit and a little air compressor, because that really slows you down. Except, hey, have machinery to unload it, but let the truckers unload it. There's so many things that we can do to be more efficient, I think, that helps us progress and recover so much faster when you're in more or less of a time crunch. That probably the hardest thing for me was we all, as agriculturalists, we all love livestock and love this industry and love ranching, and we do our diligence to do it correctly, right? And it's heartbreaking to know that these animals that we care so much about and this land that we care so much about, this is the one thing we couldn't do. We tend to them when they're sick, we tend to them when they're hungry, but we couldn't stop this, right? But we can dang sure help them recover. And if we don't prioritize and really delegate and make smart decisions, we can't do that effectively either.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. We've been fortunate to feature some of the world's leading regenerative ag and adaptive grazing experts on our show. And many of those experts are farmer rancher instructors from the nonprofit Soil Health Academy. This year, you'll have several opportunities to experience and profit from attending one of their remarkable on-farm schools and workshops. Whether you're interested in learning more about diversifying corn and bean rotations to increase profitability, merging multiple species in marketing, grazing on the high plains and in northern environments, regenerative farming and ranching, or enhancing profits and production in your beef or dairy operation, the Soil Health Academy has a school for you. One of the best investments you can make is in yourself. So visit soilhealthacademy.org to learn more and register. Financial assistance scholarships are available. Yeah, I think the one thing that I've learned just in a leadership position is, and I shouldn't say learned, I'm learning, is you've got to be specific. Like saying, like, for example, I got an elders meeting tonight. When I first communicated that we were going to have an elders meeting, it was 5:30 or 6. Well, being general doesn't help anybody. You need to pick a time and say which one it is. You're putting people in this position of not of uncertainty and not knowing what they need to do if you don't just say specifically, this is what we're doing and this is the time we're doing it. And that frees them up to plan the rest of their day accordingly.
Yes. Yes, that's everybody was on board to help. I feel like in a situation like that, like everybody's willing to come to the meeting. There does have to be a little ramrodding to say, and maybe you're not asking like the question, how can I help? It's pretty open-ended, and a lot of people dealing with, the decisions that come with what happens after fire get decision fatigue. It's a real deal, and you can't take it. You don't know what's next, and it's hard for us to ask for help that we don't realize that we need yet. But when somebody can show up and say, hey, I'll move these cows instead of how can I help? That takes one thing off of the plate of the guy dealing with it. And when you say something like, hey, I'll fix the corral so they can hold the cows because half of the corral's burned down, instead of like, how are we going to pin these cows? The guy it helps alleviate a little bit of that decision fatigue for that guy trying to make those decisions. There's probably a fine line of like you've got to be respectful of what they ask you to do, but there's a little bit of a line where you can kind of lead to, towards the top a little bit. We're saying, if I take care of this, will that help you? If I go and load this hay, call in a truck, that'll let you finish sorting the cows. And they just have to systematically, one at a time, work through some decisions, I think. And as helpers, if we can, best thing we can do is take 10 of those decisions off their plate, hopefully.
You mentioned earlier, town of Canadian, about 2,500 people, and probably a lot like a lot of small towns in those neighborhoods, or in the agricultural landscape that are really in tune or aware of at least the role agriculture plays in their economy. And so kind of what did you see coming out of that as far as the way the community joined in and the help and the relief?
Yeah, that's the most amazing thing that, gets you time after time is just the help. So my perspective is just kind of from the ag. There was a whole nother, like basically home side, with the homes that burned and the people that were affected. And part of the story of the fire too is that the town was evacuated. So the town was evacuated going south. So my wife and kids are on that convoy, and they kind of get held up by a leg of the fire that's crossing the road. And then they get to the next town south, like 30 miles. And so I'm on the ranch, Lane's on the ranch, and then, Lane's family, Dusty's family are separate from us. So it's just us three amigos up here, and the families are separated just because of the evacuation part. So the people who get evacuated have to go to the next town south 30 miles, and they're waiting there. And then that town gets evacuated. From there, people just kind of dispersed all over the Panhandle, it seems like. Yeah. You hear stories of hundreds of cars, in line, like getting out. And so that's part of the story. And so the home side is a whole new, that's probably a whole, chapter itself, is the people who came to help with the home stuff. And there's people who came to help demolish homes that have been burned. And there's a whole, whole chain of events. But so my story is just from the ag side. Because of the 2017 fire, our Hemphill County Extension AgriLife kind of headed up as well as the feed store, kind of headed up a command center in the 17 fire, where they organized loads of hay and feed and donated materials coming in. This fire was awesome to see. That's kind of like a 1.0 version in 2017. In this fire, the 2.0 version of the command center sprang up like basically overnight, I would say. Extremely well organized. People knew some of the troubles that had happened in 17. Like, it's awesome to have all the hay, but a lot of the hay got stacked in town. And so that creates a little bit of a challenge for people who, you come get a truckload or a single bale to get to the cows out in the country. And so a lot of that hay was in town, not quite as accessible as ideally. So that was one thing that was different in this fire. This command center, there was a lady named the Hay Lady. Um, she organized thousands and thousands of baled hay, and more or less, I don't know the percentage, but a lot of them got sent directly to ranches this time, which was phenomenal. Um, so the command center station at the feed store worked extremely efficiency. I mean, in extreme efficiency. They were really good about not letting people give an excuse to not take the hay, and saying, "Hey, we need you to take this. It actually helps the flow of stuff." And so that was really amazing to see. We had neighbors unload hay for us that we didn't even know was coming. So um, that means a lot.
Mm.
Um, it just shows up.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Very cool. Yeah. Yep. It's powerful to see those things happen. Some of the just getting those things dispersed, getting things dropped off, not all in the same place so that they can be found more easily. And some of those things, that's a good insight. I think that, some part of what I hope this episode does is just maybe becomes a resource where people who want to be more prepared can call the Hemphill County Extension Agent office and say, "Hey, can we just pick your brain for a minute on some of the things that we really need to have in place so that when something like this happens in our neighborhood, we can do that, or we can be ready," or I think those are that would be a powerful resource, it seems like to me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and so that was on the ag side, and then the home side as well. People sent pillows, iguana food, lunches, you name it, and something came from nearly every state in the United States. We heard about a load of hay that showed up from Canada. And another thing that was interesting. So it's one thing to get it there. You get the hay or the household stuff in place from all these wonderful volunteers. And then it's kind of another thing, like the people who really need it, who lost the cows or their grass or house or whatever, they're so busy they don't have time to come get it from the supply point. So there was kind of another group of people that were kind of like the intercessors who picked up lunches or supplies or whatever it was and took them to the people working in the country. And that was really cool. So my wife, Bryn, did a lot of that. There was hot shot crews hauling feed out to people who need it because the feed gets put in the barn a lot of time, and then they're dispersing it so there's new room in the barn. So there's that whole component of the middle people getting the second leg of the delivery completed, which was really cool.
The AgriLife deal, the Expo Center, they that deal did run incredibly good. And there was for a long time, and I guess there was overflow, like just did not have enough room to hold it all. But it was like they ran that thing like a Chick-fil-A. I mean, the volunteers and people that showed up, it was mind-blowing. They had it set up where you could go straight through it, and there were so many volunteers. I mean, you didn't hardly have to get out of the truck.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had you loaded and out of there so fast. It was crazy. It was crazy how many people wanted to help, and I don't think we could thank them enough, really.
Yeah.
We really can't.
Yeah. Shout out to Andy Holloway, right? I had a chance to talk on the phone with that guy a couple of times, and just to hear his heart for that neighborhood was pretty powerful. And just that's good people. Having good people in those spots is a big part of what makes these things work, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So what do you think about, as far as how you guys think about being prepared? what to do after the fire, where to go from there. What are some of the things that you think about now on the backside? Like, here's what we're doing.
One thing would just be, a plan during the fire. Get as many cows, to safety as possible. Equipment's a big one, if you don't have a way to unload hay or truck cattle out, those kind of equipment needs, it's way slows you down. Breakdowns are gonna happen, expect them, and that's okay. And then that network too, like just being able to say, hey, my pickup broke down, I'm on Highway 60. There's people waiting to come pick you up and give you a ride, to the mechanic shop. You just got to have that network to let them know. One funny story, we had our mule parked out, our Kawasaki side-by-side mule parked out on a...
You're not riding a mule like Juan Valdez or anything?
No, not the long-eared one. So our mule was out there, had been out there for a little while. We needed it to go to another place. So I called my cousin's husband. I said, hey, could you go? He'd volunteered to help. He said, hey, could you go pick up this mule? And I said, dropped him a pin where the mule was. He comes back a few hours later, it should have taken like an hour maybe. He said, we drove by that mule 3 times and we were looking for a real mule. So just communicate. There's people more than willing to help. We just got to be clear on what we need, from the victim standpoint. But that network, like networking helped find a place to send cattle, a place, trucks to get the cattle gone. So a lot of these cows kind of went to like a short-term home, it seemed like, just temporary, like maybe it's a week or 3 months or something. And then, now people are kind of considering a longer-term home once they can assess how their grass is sitting, how their fence rebuilding is sitting. So those kind of networking things are so valuable. You never know what's going to be out there answered unless you put the question out. So that would be an encouragement I'd give people, is put the question out there sometimes and be clear with the need.
I heard some, statements about real long recovery times being needed after the fire. Has that held? Have those recommendations kind of been what you've been hearing as well?
I think being cautious is good. It's so variable depending on the ground. So on the place that we have the burnt, it's the lease place, and some of that lower ground is ready to be grazed now. We're probably going to move some cows back to it next week. Some of that stuff is blowing sandhills, and we had several days to like 60-mile-an-hour blowing winds after that fire. And if you want to see like what a dust bowl looks like, get ash and dirt and sand blowing around, it leaves nothing behind. So that's a really fragile sandhill ecosystem that had nothing to cover it. So it's really weedy. We'd be lucky to maybe half stock at, some point over the winter, probably. So maybe on average you're 30 to 60% restocked. But if you're a fragile ground, a rough ground, rocky, sandy, being more cautious is better than being too aggressive, I think.
What have your transects told you from the 2017 fire? I mean, that could give us a little bit of an outlook.
Yeah, I forgot about that. So from the 2017 fire, that was a good fire because it squeezes enough to force us into our cell grazing stuff. We've been kicking it around for years ahead of that. But once so much grass is gone, you're like, oh, I got to figure out a way to make it stretch. And so we had just started our cell grazing stuff in our rangeland transects with photos, as well as our grazing chart, right before the 17 fire and right after we got more serious about it. That was interesting. Kind of those two objective kind of data things say it took 5 years where you could see no effect show up in the data. That's probably in terms of like stock days per acre yield compared to what was normal before it. And then that's looking at like a transect photo and saying, hey, that looks about as good as it did before the fire. It was shocking to see. I would have missed it with my own eyes, just remembering from year to year. It was shocking to see on some of those more fragile sites, like how horrible it looked the year after the fire. Um, if it was up to my memory, I would have whiffed that one and managed worse than I did.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so 5 years, on the data, eyeballing it, you maybe think 3 years we're back to normal. But that's kind of what our data showed grazing chart wise as far as yield.
Yeah. And how has it kind of changed your thinking about the risk inherent in the cattle industry as well? I mean, there's some things that I suppose it kind of causes you to re-examine enterprise mixes and some of those things too, right?
Yes, 100%. It changed our grazing style a little bit. Having an escape paddock or two, one thing. It changes our enterprise risk. I mean, our enterprise, mix. It's, we all think of the dream of owning 100% of our cows all the time, but those suckers can die in an hour. Um, you know, you don't want to send risk to anybody else, but custom grazing can be a pretty happy mix in there. Um, seasonal stockers can be a pretty happy mix. And one thing that helped us and helped lots of other people not be totally, crushed by the physical cattle losses was just fire insurance. So our Texas Farm Bureau people were awesome, and that insurance is really affordable. For us, we almost decided, hey, we're going to have it every February, March, maybe even some Aprils, no matter what. We're just going to re-up it, and it was totally worth the premium. In this case, especially, even on a normal year, I feel like it's a pretty good bargain. So those risks are out there for sure. Every extra cow, every extra grass lease or deal you've got going is a risk.
That's probably a point where your minimalist tendencies really kick in and pay off. Just every extra thing is one more thing to deal with when you're in a time crunch.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. How about, forecasts and some of those things? Was there some warning or kind of uneasy feeling leading up to it that helped kind of prepare you, or what was that like?
I mean, we knew that deal was going on the first day over to the east, and like, oh man, that seems like a bad deal, And I was in town, and Justin called, and at the time we had a little office place leased. I was working on some paperwork, and Justin said, "Hey, you might need to come out to the ranch. Like, this could get kind of serious, So, I mean, we knew it was going on the day before. We knew the months leading up to it that there was a very strong risk that something like that would happen, just because we're fortunate enough to get some very unusual winter precipitation, 3 or 4 inches in December, which is not necessarily par for the course, and so we knew there was a pretty big chance, and we even had a little bit of heads up, but even, I mean, 12 hours heads up seems like about 30 minutes when you go to trying to minimize the risk.
Yeah, I tease my wife that maybe she is psychic, but she said she had a bad feeling about it. So we're going to buy lotto tickets when she feels good about something. But just teasing her. But she kind of had a premonition about it, and then pay attention to the red flag warning days is something I take a little more seriously now. Like, it's worth thinking about. I mean, I'm not saying the sky's falling and you should just lose your mind over every red flag day, but being prepared is worth it. Just thinking about stuff that could catch on fire on your porch, or maybe you open a backyard gate so you don't have the ladder fuel crawling up to the eave of your house, or thinking about, hey, maybe we spend 2 hours thinking about where we move these cows if they do burn. Those kind of things. Where you park vehicles. That was one of the crummy things of the 2017 fire is a lot of people's stuff, like trailers and whatever, were just sitting on short grass, but they sure enough burnt to the ground. And then how do you move all your cows that you need to move with a burnt trailer? Compounding, cascading, chains of events really kind of throw you out of whack. So just thinking about some of those things. not being an alarmist, but being somewhat prepared is probably worth the effort.
Yep.
Something that we've talked about through a lot of the cell grazing stuff and soil health and optimizing our rangeland. Um, that ground gets really good and that grass is really good. But that fire can smoke through that stuff. And Justin and I have made the comment, everybody wants their house to be a showplace, right? You want the land around your house to be a showcase of your principles and your philosophies and your land management, right? But it can also be a little bit of a risk. So maybe it's okay to kind of hammer some of that ground out and kind of create a little bit of a barrier, at least, around headquarters.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen pictures from the Ronald Reagan Library in California where they grazed around the outside edge of that with goats and hammered down a bunch of fire load, and it was burned right up to where they grazed and then stopped right there. So I mean, there's definitely precedent for that. So I was just talking to a guy the other night at a birthday party, and he was telling me about his job trailer burning to the ground. And this morning I was putting some tools away in the shed, and I noticed a bottle of mineral spirits had tipped over. I'm like, it's going to be 100 degrees today. Maybe I won't shut the shed up tight, and I'll let that dissipate into the air a little bit, and evaporate before I shut the shed up tight and make it kind of a bomb with a bunch of fumes in it at 100 degrees today. So yeah, just changes the way you think about things.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So where are you now? I mean, we're 5 months here, give or take a week or two from the fire itself. And what's the recovery process been like? What have been some of the things that you've changed, or things that you say, yeah, we're going to do that again? That was a good thing that existed.
Yeah. Well, I think even just as a community, so there was like a little after the fire celebration, celebrating the helpers the other day. That was a really good thing. Just kind of say, hey, that chapter's more or less closed. We got some work to do, but thank them. And that was a good kind of like probably emotional thing for the community. But just physically, people are rebuilding fence. There's crews going. A lot of the short term, like urgent stuff is taken care of, like the water wells, the above ground infrastructure that burn or whatever, is in the process of being fixed. And so the fencing, a lot going on. People are chipping away at it. It was a good lesson on once again to like never put wood posts on our fence. So we're still down on wood and we're pro steel. But getting some of that corrected, and even on the 17 fire, I remember we had some fences that were kind of in the wrong place or weren't on the section line. And it's worth the time to go ahead and get the survey correct and get with the neighbors and visit about that and get things squared up as you're doing it. So yeah, people are considering restocking some of it. A lot of cows have gone. But it's a tough business situation too for people. They run in a ranch business now with half of the units that they did, plus all these extra costs, even with the wonderful like FSA cost share on fence, 75% is cost shared. Still is a pretty big ding when you're running only a percentage of the units that you were. So not exactly a prosperous outlook, but people are holding on and making things better, and that's going to last for the long term. But people are positive, that's what I'm excited about. It's like, I think it brought a lot of people together. It created lots of awesome stories and bonding, and then it made everybody stronger who worked through it. So that's good.
Yeah. Is that drill stem that you're putting fence back in with drill stem, or what are you using for steel?
Yeah. A lot of it's just like 2 3/8 line posts, and then some bigger 4.5-inch for corner posts and kickers and stuff like that. Yeah.
And then do you guys use any fiberglass, or what's been the experience with that in fire?
It will burn, but not necessarily to the ground. In that 17 fire, we had some burn. So some of it burned off and some of it didn't, and it looked just fine. I think now as a pro, is a good opportunity to like say, hey, do we want a hot wire fence here or do we want a barbed wire fence here? As people kind of reassess on their infrastructure plans. So there's pros and cons to it all. But when barbed wire costs $15,000 a mile or $20,000 a mile, depending on how rough the country is, we haven't built hot wire in a while, but we were building for $1,500 a mile, materials and labor. That's worth thinking about, at least to get you down the road a while. We might even do some sections of hot wire in places we don't necessarily have the fence complete where we need to get it up complete. Seems like a lot of people are waiting on contractors to get fence done now. So you can slap a lot of that up pretty fast, which is a good tool, depending on how you use it in your strategy.
And I think, just kind of as we point towards wrapping up here, some of the things I've heard you guys say frequently are be willing to accept help, be specific about what needs done and where it needs to be done, whether you are accepting help or you are going somewhere else, offer specific things, not just general questions, and have a plan and think about some of these things ahead of time, whether it's grazing certain areas lower than you probably would otherwise, but giving yourself a place to go with livestock in the moment of that disaster. And I appreciate that. Somebody recently, I was at a conference and they said it's not a drought plan, it's a disaster plan, because when 3-inch hail comes and kills every living thing other than the livestock out there, it's the same as having a drought, or a fire comes and it, burns everything. It's the same as having a drought, basically. And so this disaster planning it's not just drought, it's fire, it's flood, it's hail, it's whatever other thing this earth throws at you, And so I think those are some of the things that have really stuck out to me in the course of this conversation. Any other things that you would highlight there?
No, that disaster planning is great. And just to take it back to the people again, like when I got to work alongside, so Brian, my wife, Lane, and Dusty, it was phenomenal to see people get up early, work till dark in some really crummy conditions. When that wind's blowing 60 miles an hour, ash in your face, it's not a lot of fun. And doing what they could do to move and save cattle, not just for us, but for other people. Like, that's what I want to highlight is when you see people like that, you're like, that's amazing. I can count on you for anything. And I'm proud of that.
Yeah. Yep. Surrounding yourself with good people is incredibly valuable.
You bet.
Nothing better than that, for sure. Well, guys, it's a tough conversation. Appreciate you taking the time to have it, and hopefully it serves others in the future. So, Justin, Lane, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Clay. Appreciate it.
Very good stuff there with Justin and Lane. Really appreciate them. Again, just being willing to share their story, take the time to talk about these things. Looking forward to another episode with them about the 100th Meridian Bull Leasing Program. We've talked to them a long time ago, over 200 episodes ago now, about that program. We're going to talk to them about how it's changed and matured over the years, and some of those things coming up on another episode of the Working Cows podcast real soon. Probably the next episode that will be released, though, will be an episode with Greg Christensen. And Greg is hosting a school on goat grazing, and it will be in conjunction with another school on just grazing in general, specifically cow grazing. Dale Strickler and Greg Christensen partnering together to host a series of schools back to back on the same kind of day of the week, or same week of the year, I should say. One on grazing in general and grazing cows specifically, and then another one on incorporating goats and sheep into those grazing systems. And it'll take place in the middle of September in kind of straight south of Kansas City in Kansas there. So if you're interested in that, tune in for probably another bonus episode coming your way this Friday with Greg Christensen, and we will see you again real soon with another episode of the Working Cows Podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.